comes, thank you. We're picking, you know, they say, never give a Jackson the microphone. Because we're going to either preach or sing or dance. I'll only do the former, preaching. I won't do any singing or dancing. So, but here you have a Homo ergaster, which is the predecessor to Homo erectus. And so we're going up through time here, and you can see that the species is changing. The genus is the same, Homo, but the species is changing gradually through time. What's interesting and what has recently been discovered is that our species actually has remnants of DNA from some of these archaic species. Kind of alarming. The first group they found it in were in Europeans. They found that many Europeans had segments of DNA from Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis. Then they found another archaic Homo species, the Denisovans, and their DNA also shows up in some of the Southeast Asians and into Australia. And then they said, well, we're finding this, but what about the Africans? We're finding now some remnants of Homo heidelbergensis, and it's not showing here, but I'll show it to you on another slide, where Homo heidelbergensis contributed. So you're seeing this gradual change over time in the emergence of modern humans. We seem to be kind of a hybrid species in a sense, and we're still making sense out of all of this, but the important thing is that the pre-modern humans, that is the ones before us, are not monkeys. The pre-modern humans have elements that remind us of ourselves. That suggests that while we are important, we're not the special creations the way that the creationists, so-called creationists, would have us believe. That there's greater depth, there's greater nuance, there's greater complexity than their simple arguments would allow for. I prefer to embrace that truth. So here we're looking at the emergence of modern humans in recent evolutionary time. And we're starting again 2 million years ago with Homo erectus. The heidelbergensis you can see is there. If we follow these lines, at some point we can find genetic Hawa. Genetic Hawa. She would be the woman who showed a mitochondrial DNA type that is the foundation for all of the mitochondrial DNA that we have. Okay, so you know about the mitochondria, right? That these are organelles that are in the cell. They used to be separate, independent organisms, but then they were brought together in the creation of multi-celled organisms. They have their own DNA. You have inherited the mitochondria from your mother. So your mitochondria and your mother's is identical. It passes through the maternal lineage. Just as those of you who are men, you have a Y chromosome from your father. So we can trace the variation, the genetic variation in Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA, and we can go back and calculate when genetic Adam and genetic Hawa actually existed. What are the mechanisms that cause change? Because we are not identical now to genetic Adam or genetic Hawa. We can tell that. We can look at the diversity in modern humans. As generations pass, mutations occur naturally. They occur naturally at a rate of about 10 to the minus 5. These mutations allow us to trace distinct ancestral lines, and they also give us information about more recent ancestry. So mutation, along with gene flow, along with genetic drift, recombination, natural selection, and artificial selection, as in the the production of all these different breeds of domesticated dogs, that's artificial selection, but it nonetheless produces diversity. So these are our artistic renditions of what might some of our pre-modern humans look like. And no one would deny that they look very human-like. But from a biological point of view, they're not Homo sapiens. When and where did some early modern humans migrate from Africa? Because we know the origins of humanity in terms of the fossil evidence and the genetics are in Africa. We know that about 70,000 years ago, we get groups coming out of Africa, and what's so interesting is that there were several routes that had been proposed. The southern route, going from what is now Djibouti to what is now Yemen, ends up being the preferred way. And the reason for that is during a glacial period, the water is kind of sucked up in the ice, so it leaves the ground bare, so that people can cross what is now the Red Sea. At that time, 65,000 years ago, the Red Sea, there were places where it was only about 16 inches high. So you could walk across from Africa to Arabia. So the first migrations of modern humans who evolved in Africa and then moved into Arabia, from there followed the coastlines, okay, because there was food there. You follow the coastlines into India, into Southeast Asia, into Australia. Other groups began to move up into Central Asia or Eurasia, then going west into Europe. Other groups moved around into Asia, populating East Asia, and some groups then moved from Central Asia all the way down to the Americas. And it's the genetic lineage that we can trace to reconstruct these models. It's not just something we made up. It's like we're looking at the genetics. For example, I'll tell you, my maternal lineage is Native American. I'm African American, but my maternal lineage is Native American. So when they looked at my mitochondrial DNA, they said, your ancestors, your maternal ancestors are in Siberia. It was very shocking. I started going to Chinese restaurants saying, oh, my new peeps. So they kept saying, now where exactly in Asia are you from? So, you know, Allah's messages are all around us. Science helps us decode those messages, again, so that we can be closer to Allah, so that we can feel the Islam in our hearts, so it influences our behavior. These are the modern day miracles. You know, we don't have the benefit of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ here with us, but it keeps him fresh in our minds. I'm sorry. I have to preach what I believe. And I'm a scientist. I believe, I understand the evolution. It's not a belief system. It's a reality. It's the fact. And I believe in Allah. This is, again, more on the out of Africa route. This is based on genetic recombination. So whatever method we use, it gives us a little bit more information that we add to the model. It invigorates. It makes the evolutionary paradigm more robust. Here we're using, again, genetics. We see an origin part. This is where the first circle here, over here is the movement out of Africa into the Arabian Peninsula. Moving around here, we know that South Asia was a very important point in terms of human evolution, because from there, groups then migrated out elsewhere, and this going on, okay? Now, genetic Adam and genetic Hawa, who were they? Again, I kind of preempted this slide by showing you, by saying that genetic Adam is the genetic ancestor of all modern human males, based upon the Y chromosome data. The Y chromosome is the smaller of the two entities there. Okay? This is the human X and Y chromosome from a scanning electron micrograph. Who was genetic Hawa? That means the genetic ancestor of all modern humans based upon the mitochondrial DNA data. This is the depiction of the migration patterns of males. Now, early modern males didn't necessarily move together with early modern females, okay? Some of the earliest migrants out of Africa, we think, were young males. And it probably has differences to do in the sexes. You know, that some of these young males, they just want to go explore things. They just want to move around. So you find more evidence of early males moving out quickly, trying out, moving into different areas. And the letters represent the different types of Y chromosome variants that we find in different regions. This group, I'm not tall enough to reach it, but do you see that Q up there at the very top? That was just a very small group of a small tribe in northern Central Asia. But a few brothers from there were among the first to make the migrations to the Americas. Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, here we go. So most of the humans, in Native American peoples in North America have this Q, Y chromosome, and here's where it's derived from. But that, you see, is connected to this and comes down, comes down, comes down all the way to genetic Adam. Okay. Then this is for the mitochondrial DNA. And actually this should show L0 as genetic Hawa rather than L1. But we can see that we get these variants in Africa, and then they cross over into the rest of the world, and N and M come out of L3. And then look at this diversity in Europe. Part of this tremendous mitochondrial diversity, it tells us about the social structure in Europe, that these were small groups of people that really held on to their women. There wasn't a lot of movement of women. Going across here, now when we get into the Americas, you get A, B, C, D, and then X. X is interesting because X shows up here in Europe. We don't know if this X came from a lost Viking or where this X came from, but it's kind of interesting. So the diversity, all of this diversity here in these letters are derived from genetic Hawa. And we can show that looking at comparing the genetic patterns. Again, following the genetic footprints out of Africa, the first modern humans out of Africa settled in Arabia. And I went to a very nice exhibit recently at the Smithsonian Institute, and they showed the archaeology of Arabia. And I was surprised they showed some tools that were very simple tools. And I said, why are those tools in Arabia? Oldowan tools, they're called. They just look like rocks, you know, but they're minimally fashioned. And yet those tools show up in Arabia means that early humans, early modern humans were there. So these are conceptual issues, and I'll wrap this up. This is my last section. The epigenome, and Dr. Babuna mentioned the epigenome or epigenetics. Let me give you a more complete understanding of the epigenome. So the epigenome is the totality of changes, chemical changes around the DNA. And as I've depicted here, you see these menthol groups. When they are in proximity to a particular gene, they can influence which protein is produced by that gene. Because any one gene can produce 4 or 5 different isoforms of a particular protein. You know, when I was when I was in school, they said one gene, one protein. But then now that we've sequenced the entire human genome, we realize there's not that many genes. My God, a tomato plant has more genes than we do. So, you know, but that's because plants are stationary. So they have developed all kinds of chemical signals to get us to eat them or not eat them, you know. Humans, we're locomotor, we move, and other animals. So these mental groups here can influence which protein is being expressed by this particular gene, but it doesn't change the gene. It only changes gene expression. That's important. Whoops. So what that does is it gives us even more chances for variability while keeping us united as a species. Okay? Epigenetics is broadly defined as inherited, environmentally derived modifications to gene expression that are achieved without alterations in the nucleotide sequence of the gene itself. Now, these epigenetic changes, as far as we can tell, they only last for about 4 generations. So they're not permanent in a real evolutionary sense. They're important, but they can be changed, even within the lifetime. So any of you ladies who are thinking about having a baby, be sure to take your folic acid, because the folic acid will change the epigenome, making it more favorable for appropriate development of your fetus. You know, so we can change through diet. We can change through environmental exposures the nature of the epigenome. Another conceptual issue is in terms of craniometry. When we look at, these are the skulls of some of those extinct hominids that I showed you before, starting with Sahelanthropus over here on the end here, going all the way down to modern humans here. Now, if you look at these skulls, what I want you to notice is this frontal lobe right here, okay? This frontal area. Do you see how the frontal area becomes bigger, rounder, more vertical over time? So that by the time we get to modern humans, we have a frontal bone right here that is actually vertical. It's not sloping back. This is very important, I think, because behind the frontal bone sits the frontal lobe of the brain. The frontal lobe of the brain is concerned with executive cognitive processes. This is the emotional control center. It's the home to our personality. The frontal lobes are involved in motor function, problem solving, spontaneity, memory, language, initiation, judgment, impulse control, social and sexual behavior. This is really important. So when Allah says that He will grab the disbelievers by their lying, sinful forelocks, and I said, what is He talking about? Lying, sinful forelocks. This is an outcome of our evolution, that we have the capacity to make choices, sometimes bad choices, that we are responsible for. Biocultural adaptations are the most important factor in human evolution. As modern humans wandered around in and out of Africa, many changes occurred in our lineage, producing our current patterns of modern human variation. But in spite of our variation, in spite of the so-called differences between us, I'm absolutely convinced that Allah doesn't care about that at all. He cares about what is in our hearts. And this, of course, is from the Quran. That, O mankind, we have created you from a single pair, a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know each other and not despise each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is the one who is the most righteous of you, that is, has taqwa, and Allah has full knowledge of all things and is well acquainted. That's what's important. All the other superficial baggage here, the shell, this is our test. The heart, the spirit, the soul is from Allah. We can't measure that scientifically, but we know it as Muslims. So this was honestly, my last from Sheikh Turai. He says the Quran and the Sunnah neither confirm nor deny the theory of biological evolution or the process referred to as natural selection. The question of evolution remains purely a matter of scientific inquiry. The theory of evolution must stand or fall on its own scientific merits. And that means the physical evidence that either confirms the theory or conflicts with it. So why shouldn't we investigate? Why shouldn't we study the diversity that Allah has created so as to understand His creation and ourselves better? Thank you so very much.